Okay, calm down.
I mean, it seems obvious that the whole point of what she was doing had nothing to do with votes. It had to do with the fact that she was trying to show herself to be a reliable commander-in-chief to the sort of broader imperialist power structure.
Now, Eugene, I have a question for you and you, Rania, but something that I haven't really heard people address, because people would always talk about how popular it was for her, popular would have been for her to call for the end of, she was never going to say the end of the genocide, the end of the war, or an arms embargo, right? But no one really answered the question of what would have that would have been the benefit. What would have been the cost in terms of backlash to that? So AIPAC would have gone after her, and how do you think that would have affected the actual election?
Well, the numbers on that are not really clear. I mean, I actually do not believe that it would have affected the election that much. I mean, the very limited polling we have on Jewish American voters, which is the only proxy we really have for Zionist, of course, there's not a direct relationship between the two, but that's kind of all we had, is it seemed as if people were more or less, the majority of people were going for Kamala because of other issues. I think the people who she would have lost were already gone. I think the sort of Bill Ackmans of the world, the other people like that who had a reputation as Democrats, I think they decided that it wasn't really about Kamala for them, and they switched to Trump early on. I don't think that there's anybody who would have said, I'm for Kamala, but now she's for an arms embargo on Israel, so I'm dropping. I mean, there may have been a few people, but it's hard for me to see that as because those people, I feel, already feel, whether they're right or wrong, that the Democrats are going to be more pro-Palestinian, and that no matter what they say, once they get in there, they're going to do something else. So I think it's sort of like she was playing to a constituency that I'm not sure existed. I think the people who are Israel supporters of some type or another who supported her would have definitely stuck with her through a ceasefire and an arms embargo call, because it seems like that's what the polling was bearing out. So to me, it really feels like if it was just about votes, she could have done more, would have done more. There was low-hanging fruit, you might call it, that was not out there. I mean, there was a rumor that Biden was considering sanctioning Ben-Gvir and Smotrich at different points because of the West Bank. They chose not to do that. That obviously could have helped them. The United States is already on record that it views settlements in the West Bank as illegal. There's, pogroms going on, of Palestinian farmers. They said nothing about that. So there are all sorts of things they could have said and done that are already things that are the position of the U.S. government, of which she is the vice president, and that also already have the support of a significant number of Democrats, including most of them who say that they're for a two-state solution, more liberal Zionist and others, and they chose not to act on any of that whatsoever, which is why all of it to me seems like it couldn't have been about votes. It had to have been about something else. But yeah, I do think that the Democrats probably did lose some voters, though. Don't get me wrong. I just think they lost those voters in, January of 2024.
Right, yeah. I see people already blaming. There's also this take that's like, we have to accept the fact that, like Julia Yaffe said, like, we have to reckon with the fact that half of the country is okay with fascism. I'm like, show me you're not reckoning with reality without telling me you're not reckoning with reality.
We have to reckon with the fact that Julia Yaffe is actually genocidal. She's a genocidal psychopath who thinks Israel massacring babies every day in Gaza is legitimate. And that Israel has the right to massacre. Like anyone like her, she's an actual fascist. Like,
well, that's what I'm saying. Someone wrote in the comments, they were like, "Wait, I thought you liked Israel." Meaning, like, I thought you liked fascism.
It's actually the most disgusting for somebody who has actively justified genocide to dare call half the country supportive of fascism. It's insane.
Yeah, that's what people are really doing.
Fucking mirror, excuse my language. The next few days are going to be painful to be online because the absolute dumbest takes are going to come from the most genocidal, centrists and liberals, and they're going to be fantasizing about all three of us being deported because fascist Trump is taking over, when they don't care about fascism in any other country that their special candidate and forces around the world. And also, like you guys were talking about Joe Biden. I mean, like, what were these people thinking? What were these people thinking? And what planet do they live where they think that any of this was going to work? I mean, at the end of the day, Kamala Harris was their Hail Mary because they kept life support Joe Biden in office, who was working like 10 to 4 every day because he had to nap the rest of the day. And even when he was on the clock, his brain was mush and he couldn't speak. And they replaced him with an unpopular, soulless, like robot, Kamala Harris, who has very few redeemable qualities other than she will sell herself to the highest bidder and repeatedly offend every single person who is like to the left of Liz Cheney. Just really, really incredible stuff. I mean, there's going to be like books written about how to be the worst political party in history. But, you know, I think actually something Eugene and I were talking about last week was, I can't remember what the context was of what the Harris campaign was doing. But essentially it was when she sent Richie Torres to Michigan to reassure some group. Any empathy she demonstrated for Arabs was like not going to affect Israel policy. And at the end of the day, I think we need to remember that imperialism always comes first. And yeah, Democrats could have supported a ceasefire and people would have voted for them. But the thing is, Democrats don't want a ceasefire because imperialism doesn't want a ceasefire, because support for Israel is all about imperialism. So at the end of the day, they're willing to take a loss if it means supporting imperialism. There's a reason why she will court Liz Cheney, but no one on the left, because she's an imperialist and imperialism works first. And it's just going to become more and more depraved and grotesque under either party as time goes on. And so I think that we're going to have a lot of questions, just like Democrats have a lot of introspection to do that they won't. We have a lot of reflecting to do on what we do next, because there's still a genocide happening. There's still an escalating war in the Middle East. There's still great power competition. There's still this, ultimate desire for a big war with China. You know, we know Trump's an very anti-China president. We also have to consider what's going to happen across Latin America, because that's always continuing to be worse. I mean, not like it was any better under Biden. I mean, look at what's happened in Cuba. But that said, that's going to continue to be a problem. So they're going to intensify their depravity, and we need to intensify our resistance to it in whatever way that means. So those are the conversations that people like us need to be having, because we actually care, unlike Democrats and unlike the liberal robots who support them despite genocide. We actually care about building a better world.
Well, I will tell you, Katie, to your point, I think that's a relevant point about what people are this whole Julie Iof's thing about fascism. I mean, I think the important thing for people to remember, one important thing to remember, is this is like, that actually can be proven empirically. I mean, we're at about 120 million votes so far in the presidential election. There's still a lot to come in. We had about 150 million people vote in 2020, so it looks like it'll actually be lower turnout. But all you have to do is ask: are the number of people who voted for Trump equivalent to 51% of all adult Americans? And that is highly unlikely that will be the case. I mean, first and foremost, you got 12 to 15 million undocumented people not counted, 4 million people who can't vote because of felony conviction. The roughly 40% of registered voters who tend to not vote, all things considered, and not everyone is registered to vote. So, the president and whoever wins the presidency every single year is actually representing a minority of over 18-year-old people in the country, usually. Not all the time, but many of the times. Now, the overall turnout often gets above that number of people, but in terms of the winning candidate, you're often still below a majority, and I think that Trump will undoubtedly likely be below a majority. So to say half the country, but the other piece of that is, many of those people, I would say maybe most of them, but I would say many of them significantly do not view voting for Trump as voting for fascism. They don't necessarily view Trump as someone who's going to destroy and eliminate all unions, which the fascists did. They don't necessarily view Trump as someone who's going to ban interracial, interethnic, and interreligious marriages, which, of course, the Nazis did. They don't necessarily view Trump as someone who is going to put 6 million people into death camps and execute them simply for being Jewish or Roma or having a developmental disability. And in fact, I don't think they expect Trump to do mass sterilizations of people with developmental disabilities. And by developmental, I mean, people who are considered to have low IQs and other things like that. Now, I'm sure are some people out there who do believe Trump is going to do those things. I am not one of them. I think he's going to do many bad things, but I think a lot of people And this is the whole thing about the Democratic rhetoric around fascism. You know, a lot of people, I think, look at it and say, like, okay, it seems bad, but that does seem a little over the top. And I think that there's not going to be a real reckoning amongst liberals. And I encourage people to go back and to listen to the show I did with Brian Becker on last Wednesday about this issue. But you look at the things people are the most upset about. Well, Trump's going to call the military out into the streets to suppress protests, and that's fascistic. Well, if that's the case, Trump's actual predecessor, the person he's following, is not Hitler. It's the American law. It's the Insurrection Act that is the U.S. law that allows him to do that. So if you're saying that Trump's a fascist for doing that, then you're basically saying all America has been fascist since 1807 when it came out. And, you know, maybe you wouldn't be wrong if you said that, because the 1807 Insurrection Act comes after the consolidation of the militia acts, which were designed to find a way to be able to crush Native Americans and to crush poor people who might revolt against the rich people who had just taken over from the King of England. You know, they say he's going to deport 12 to 15 million people. And he's going to use the Alien Enemies Act. Well, that's American, not German. And so many of the things that Trump is doing that the liberals are saying, that the Democrats are saying are the most fascistic, are things that are written into U.S. law that at no time have they ever sought to remove them. I mean, the Alien Enemies Act was used to help justify the internment of Japanese Americans. The Democrats at no time have said, let's get rid of the Insurrection Act. They're not even saying it now. They're just saying, vote against Trump because he's a fascist, but we're not going to do anything to actually disable the law that will allow him to do the thing that we say is fascist. And then just to put a cherry on top of that cake, then you have Kamala say, we're going to give them a seat at the table. Well, wait a second. You're saying Trump supporters are fascists today, and then the next day you're saying we're giving them a seat at the table. So what does that really mean? And I think it's overheated rhetoric. And it's I'm sorry that it's overheated, because it means the real dangers of a Trump presidency don't come into focus. And that a lot of people actually don't take it that seriously, because they feel like, they're just saying it. They're just saying
they're used to hyperbole. They think of it as hyperbole. And that the evidence, that the walk doesn't match the talk. You know, and I think a lot of people do dismiss that. I mean, we saw that with same thing with the Russiagate stuff. People will just roll their eyes at things because it wasn't this conspiracy that they claimed it was. And I think that he is perfect at calling that stuff out. And the Democrats do hyperbolize, and then they of course use, like you said, Eugene, so intelligently, like they don't use their tools to disable the things that a fascist will be using.
Rania.
Also, sorry, real quick, I just want to quote Justin Potter, who I've had on Dispatches before, friend of the show. He tweeted, if they lost honorably, sticking to their principles of genocide, cruelty, contempt for voters, and structural cowardice. I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. It's actually perfectly encapsulates what we witnessed tonight.